Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go quickly. And this is all hot off the press, which is a euphemism for it could have been better prepared. So let's see how we get on. Yes, we've got a big push towards online at UAL. And rather than just make lots of stuff and put it online, fully online distance provision, we thought we'd actually do some research in that area. And this responds to our University Arts London strategy. If you don't know what the University Arts London is, feel free to Google, but it's a big art and design university based in London, as the name would suggest. And so we had the opportunity to actually, and it's quite a rare thing, isn't it? Because you can't really experiment with a course that has sort of paying students on it. And so when you're trying to sort of interrogate or inquire around curriculum and pedagogy, you usually have to do it in a slightly sort of synthetic environment. This approach was the closest we could get to the real thing, if you like, without it being an official piece of the curriculum. And here's how we went about it. We've taken about 6 months, quite a lot of people involved. We ended up with 350 learners, so it was free for them to engage with us. We ended up with 1,400 sign-ups. So we had to switch the tap off on that because they just kept coming. And the evaluation is in the form that you can see there. The format, so this was something I was very particular about, actually, was it certainly at my university, there's this sense that you probably couldn't teach anything in less than 10 weeks. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun to make these experiments 3 weeks long? That developed out of validated courses. So there's sort of a chunk of an existing course. What's important in terms of the pedagogy is that there was this ratio of, I guess, is that 1 to 3, but 4 hours of synchronous and 12 hours of async. Again, for us as an institution, pedagogic experiment which doesn't entirely lean on synchronous is quite a big deal and really interesting. The other important thing that we did was we made sure that it was what I call like a complete pedagogic arc. So the participants or learners would be given a creative brief, they'd undertake some creative work in different forms, and then they'd get some sort of feedback. Okay, they wouldn't get accredited or anything like that. We give them a nice certificate, but it was a very sort of authentic miniature version of a piece of curriculum. 15 different research activities. You see they cover quite a lot of ground, from curating fine art, writing, coding, all sorts of things in between. And I'm sure many of you are looking at that list and thinking, oh, I'd love to do one of those, because some of those are great, right? This is what I like about my institution. We did a lot of work, right? This is one of those slides which I've just put in to say, look at all the work we did. I'm not going to get into it, but there's a lot of Miro boards happened. We had thematic research groups where we were looking at things like flexibility, belonging. We were looking at induction, shared content, and we did that in conjunction with a good cross-section of staff from across the institution to make sure that we took views from everyone. And so that's going into it. Coming out of it, we've got some really lovely analytics. Well, it's data, but Paul Tabak in the team has made it look beautiful. You just want to run your mouse all over that, don't you? And see what happens when you hit all of those little blobs, because you find interesting things out. Again, this is pretty progressive for my institution. It's not something we've done much of before, is to really sort of get under the bonnet of our VLE. So we can see patterns of engagement or patterns of access. And this is largely what it looked like, certainly in the synchronous bits. I mean, what I like about this image here is it shows the sort of reality, which is, yes, there's a computer, but there's also some sort of creative practice going on, and it's mixed up. Okay, unless it's a course that's about coding when it's all happening inside the machine. But this is pretty typical. The materiality, embodied practice, and all the rest of it still goes on when you're doing a fully online course. It's just going on kind of locally and distributed. So I just want to go through very quickly some of the things that we've learned. This was a co-design process. At my institution, curriculum is largely designed within the course team. Some of the courses are designed by sort of an academic in auteur mode. We put together teams of people that included learning designers from my team, other members of staff, to design these, if you like, pedagogic experiments. That was interesting. We learned a lot about, you know, where we needed perhaps culture change. We realized we needed to define roles much more clearly. Shout out to people in my team who are in the audience. You're brilliant. If you wanted to say hello in chat, feel free. If you're feeling brave, I happen to know the learning designers are here. We realized we didn't define, there we go, hello Rob. We didn't define roles as clearly as we could have done, including what the role of the academic is, which is interesting because we use words like tutor or teacher, subject matter expert, academic, and we don't necessarily define that role. It's quite a kind of ambiguous role. Here's bits of data. I'm not going to go into this because I've got to go quickly. Not surprising. This is the survey on the way in from participants. This is what they felt was important. This is something we were really interested in. We're really interested in being student-centered and I'll come back to this very quickly, but we work on the assumption that all our students are very different, but they're all very busy. So the question is, could we provide a pedagogic design that allowed them to effectively engage and learn whilst they also did all the rest of their life? And what you could see is they still struggled. Okay, actually, I think we did really well. These were free, they were 3 weeks long, and we really actually held on to the students. We used the live sessions as a proxy for retention, if you like, and we did pretty well. Given that it didn't lead to anything official, if you like, but it's an area that we're very interested in. So there's co-design, bit of data there for you. Flexibility and connectedness was a real biggie. Interestingly, the students or participants don't necessarily expect to be provided with something flexible. They just hope they can hang on to the process. I wonder if we sort of train them to think that way about higher education. And flexibility is a design problem. I'm not going to run through all of those points. What's interesting is flexibility for whom on what basis is one of those really big terms that actually needs unpicking. On occasion, flexibility seemed to be assumed to be something that was there for the staff rather than for the students, but we're trying to be student-centered about it. Certainly, really short, purposeful live sessions were very, very important. Okay, and little sort of health warning, asynchronous isn't necessarily fundamentally flexible. That's interesting. And flexibility doesn't reduce the need for support, but I think it changes the emphasis on support. Okay, so what it comes down to is how do you use those synchronous sessions effectively, and how do they relate to the async sessions or activities? I was really keen to not use the term belonging because I think it's too big a term, especially over a 3-week period. I want to use the term connected. So I'm interested in togetherness and connectedness. And what you can see is the participants, the learners, really did feel pretty connected, actually, which I think is a win. So I think we're doing something right with the model that we're developing. I think fully online distance learning, they're busy people. They've not built their life around the course in the same way that an 18 to 21-year-old might do around a residential course. Do they want to belong to the institution? Do they have time to belong to the institution? We're not entirely sure. Do they want to look back over their week and go, there was a moment of connectedness, and there was a moment of togetherness, and I feel good about that? Probably. Okay. It's an interesting area that we need to explore a little bit more. Okay, so I've got just a couple of minutes for some big thoughts. You'll note I didn't use the term findings because I think that's too strong at this point. I'll just run through these very quickly. Designing flexible curriculum is difficult, but it's much easier than running it. Okay, the limiting factor is actually the systems and the processes and the regulations of the institution, and that is what we're currently calling at UAL the big question, if you like. And that's something we're really interested in getting into, not just for online, but also for residential. And online kind of becomes a Trojan horse into that sort of area. Don't forget that these might not be the same students, by which I mean I feel like quite a lot of online distance learning, if your institution's relatively new to it, is designed with this sort of implicit assumption that the students doing online learning are going to be sort of the same sort of students that are doing residential learning. but you need to sort of shine a spotlight on that. There is the obligatory link to my most recent blog post there where I discuss that in some detail, but not too much detail. It sounds obvious, but I think we're coming to the conclusion that we've broken down the data based on personas and trying to group students. Did this student group think this, that, or the other, or did they respond better to this, that, or the other? And what we're finding is there are two things. One, individual circumstances. Everybody's a different person. They come from different, they have different circumstances, different calls on their time in their lives. Two, as I mentioned, all our students are busy. Okay. On that basis, possibly the most inclusive thing you can do is to make sure that your curriculum has a predictable structure, workload, and that students can then plan around it. Okay, sounds super obvious, but I think it might just be the most important thing. Hence learning designers, hence learning design. It's really, really, really important. And then lastly, bit of a businessy thing, don't confuse the pedagogy and the market. Okay, so you might sort of say, well, if we want this kind of online course for this kind of person, we ought to design it in this kind of a way. I'm beginning to wonder whether actually really good quality pedagogy, which is designed for busy people, is largely the same for any group of busy people. There is such a thing as just good practice, and it's about 80% the same no matter who you're pointing your stuff at, right? And I think that's a really powerful discovery that we can back up. And even just this morning, we were kind of looking at that idea against which of those 15 experiments held on to the most students for longest as a kind of proxy for success. And I think we're on to something. So as I say, still work in progress. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I've just posted the link to David's blog post there as well. But that last message I think was a really powerful one. So yeah, I think definitely a take-home message there. Thank you. I can see that someone in the chat has raised their hand. Miss Guest, would you like to ask David a question? You should be able to unmute your mic now.
Don't worry if it's becoming a technical event.
Okay, we do have one question here from Mike. If this can be, a quick one, I don't know. Mike has asked, how different might findings have been if this approach was applied for all courses rather than just a 3-week experiment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that my learning designers are in the room and they'd be better placed to answer this than me, so I'm going to tread carefully. I think probably what we're looking at is there'll be adjustments based on the specifics of subject or discipline focus, if you like. I think a well-designed, you could argue a well-designed 10-week course is just 3 and a bit chunks, 2 and a bit chunks of a well-designed 3-week, so I don't think the approach is going to be significantly different. I think the difference will be that we didn't have summative assessment because we weren't going to fire up the whole kind of accredited machine for this experiment. And so that'll be interesting to see, just thinking about the previous 2 talks, how that might, twist what we do and shift the design. My feeling is it won't that much. I think we found we're heading towards a kind of pretty robust core design for fully online learning that can actually be applied in a lot of different pedagogic contexts, because as I say, it's student-centered. And so it's all about maximizing the chance that any given student can engage as fully as possible given their life, if you like. And if you manage that, then only good things can come from it. Under any circumstances.
Absolutely.
Do you see what I mean? I'm not being simplistic. I'm not being trite. But I really think that's the case.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We will have to stop there. But thank you, David. I'm so pleased we've got you on. So yeah, thank you for taking the time.